लगता है हाउस वार्मिंग में सबको इम्प्रेस करके छोड़ोगी।
तुम अपने काम पे ध्यान दो।
जी मैडम। एक बार आके देख लो, कहीं मैंने कोई गड़बड़ तो नहीं कर दी।
सिर्फ मेरा नाम क्यों?
अरे, जिसने घर खरीदा है उसी का नाम होना चाहिए ना।
और फ्रेंड्स क्या कहेंगे?
फ्रेंड्स कहेंगे कि काश अपनी बीवी भी ऐसी होती।
पिछले 100 सालों से ऐसी हर अच्छी शुरुआत का साथ दे रहे हैं हम और हमारी न्यू एज बैंकिंग सर्विसेज यूनियन बैंक ऑफ इंडिया।
लगता है हाउस वार्मिंग में सबको इम्प्रेस करके छोड़ोगी।
तुम अपने काम पे ध्यान दो।
जी मैडम। एक बार आके देख लो, कहीं मैंने कोई गड़बड़ तो नहीं कर दी।
सिर्फ मेरा नाम क्यों?
अरे, जिसने घर खरीदा है उसी का नाम होना चाहिए ना।
और फ्रेंड्स क्या कहेंगे?
फ्रेंड्स कहेंगे कि काश अपनी बीवी भी ऐसी होती।
पिछले 100 सालों से ऐसी हर अच्छी शुरुआत का साथ दे रहे हैं हम और हमारी न्यू एज बैंकिंग सर्विसेज यूनियन बैंक ऑफ इंडिया।
Exactly 4, already almost 300 people are in. Exactly 4, you switch on the video on. Vikram.
It's been a strange couple of months for all of us. Our world has changed completely thanks to the COVID-19 crisis and the lockdown. Everyone's talking about a new normal in the way we live, a new normal in the way we communicate and interact with other people, and a new normal most definitely in the way we work or carry on our businesses. This webinar is also part of that new normal. We are delighted to have with us today Dr. D.K. Joshi. Dr. D.K. Joshi is, of course, very well known to regular readers of the Hindu Business Line. He has often written thoughtful pieces on our comment pages. Is one of the country's leading economists. He's a chief economist for rating agency CRISIL, and a very, very, very astute and knowledgeable observer of the Indian economy. And I can think of no better person to help us decode the stimulus package, the 20 lakh crore stimulus package that the government announced in a bid to tackle the economic impact of the nationwide lockdown, which was introduced shortly after the cases started spiking in our country. Welcome, Dr. Joshi.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Before I start, I would also like to thank Union Bank of India for supporting us in this venture. We hope to bring you many more such useful interactions in the days going forward. Dr. Joshi, I mean, I think the way we would go about this is that I would like you to share your thoughts and your understanding of this stimulus package with all our viewers who are with us now, and then perhaps after that we could go into a more detailed discussion and also take questions from the audience. Over to you,
sure.
sir.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Srinivasan. What I'll do is I think I'll give you what we think is going on in the economy. And also I think I'll end with some comments on the stimulus package, and then we can take the debate ahead, I think, in the Q&A session on what kind of questions you want to ask and so on. So I think very briefly, just as some headline issues, I think let me start by saying that we are still learning about this crisis. And I think it's very, very difficult for anyone to say exactly what's going to happen. Even in normal times, it's difficult. And right now, I think where the problem is emanating from health issues and which are unpredictable, I think you can understand how the origin of the problem cannot be predicted properly. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen to rest of the economy as a result of that. I think whatever prognosis we are doing currently, we believe that this crisis will be contained substantially in the June quarter. I mean, that's the assumption that we are making on the basis of what the health experts were saying. And so that's behind our prognosis. The other point I wanted to make is that I think just to start on a little humbling note, that I mean, this is a non-linear event, which I think humans find it extremely difficult to understand. First of all, the crisis itself is non-linear. It follows an exponential path, and which is very hard to quantify. And I think the epidemiologists are also not being able to correctly predict its path because there's so many factors influencing it. And I think also there's non-linearity. I mean, we have lockdowns. So everyone is talking about lockdowns these days. 2-month lockdown is not twice as much harmful as 1-month lockdown. It's actually much more than that, because I think as you progress into the lockdown, your buffers keep eroding and then it starts hitting you. So that's another multiplicative. I mean, so it's another level of complication. I think one thing that we believe is definitely going to happen, people's incomes are going to come down, but the proportion of income saved is going to go up. So I think this is typically what happens during crisis, and it's going to happen this time also. And what we have learned from whatever is happening across the world and also what's happening here is that no matter how much stimulus or policy measures you may take, I think you can only offset the damage to some extent. I think nobody, you can only minimize it, so to say. I mean, offsetting is simply out of question. I mean, with such massive packages, I think we're still talking of a very, very deep global recession. And I think, the narrative on the crisis itself is quite interesting. I mean, since we are going to talk about the stimulus also. If I take you about 2 months back into the scene, what we saw was at that time, we were worried about some supplies not coming from China, maybe for API, for pharmaceutical, or maybe auto component. After a few days, it became a global problem. So we were talking about a recession hitting us as well. And then when it landed on our shores, then I think the entire narrative has completely shifted to how do you control it and what are the implications of lockdown. So we've seen a variety, I mean, it evolved over a period of time into a much, much bigger crisis. And I think the chances are that it's going to explode even further, I mean, going ahead, because the risks are tilted to the downside. I think very briefly on the global side, the S&P, our parent company, does expect GDP growth globally to fall by 2.4% with a deep recession and downside risks in almost all the countries. And the unprecedented monetary and fiscal stimulus are only going to limit the damage, so to say. I think the other thing which is hitting us, which I think we talk on the sidelines, I think India receives world's largest remittances. So if you look at this chart, what you will find is that most of the countries that give us remittances are in deep recession. So World Bank estimated a few days back that the remittances to India will fall by about 23%. I think it's going to be much larger than that, because since then, I think we've seen much, much deeper impact. So we'll not only have migrants, immigrants come back to India. I think that is an additional problem you have. It's also going to choke revenue sources for many of the states that depend heavily on that. I think I don't want to get into this chart. This is historical, but what I want to highlight is that we started off on a very weak note. I mean, in this fiscal year, last year's GDP growth is expected to be at 5%, but the data is coming out on end of this month, and my sense is we'll be around 4% or maybe even below that. And the data for the month of March, I think, is not comforting. A few days of lockdown and few restrictions here and there were enough to trim your industrial production by almost 16%. And I think data for April is showing even more bloodbath. I mean, the exports have already fallen by close to 60%. And I think various other indicators are pointing that the April probably will be the worst month. So I think, so that's a little background. And I think when we talk about the stimulus, it's also important to understand what is guiding India's strategy to this whole pandemic. I think the reality number one is that India's high population density, which is 3 times that of China, makes it extremely vulnerable to the spread of virus. We have weak health infrastructure. And the third, I think, which is being talked about now more in the context of the stimulus packages, that we have limited fiscal space. The government started with the first 2 objectives, I mean, to control the pandemic. And the more you control the pandemic, through lockdowns, the more fiscal space you require, because I think the activities are being curtailed and people need to be supported more. Since you don't have that, I think there is very little option for a number of people but to return to work. And we are seeing it gradually open up, and I think that might gain pace going ahead. So this yo-yoing will continue across, going ahead, and depending on how the virus plays out. And I think what's going to shape the days ahead, and also what is going to shape the policy action is number one, are we able to contain it? I mean, as we are expecting right now. If we are not, then, or if there is a second wave, then we have huge amount of trouble. The other point to note is that the policy support is extremely critical. I mean, because if the policy support of whatever is possible, even stretching beyond that, is not forthcoming, then I think you have other problems at hand because you could permanently lose productive capacity. So what do I mean by that? I mean, just to, I think, give our viewers some historical context. I mean, this is, I think, I don't want to get into the technicality of these charts, but in very simple terms, I mean, if you see the first chart, that is, there is a straight line which shows you the trend of GDP, not the GDP growth, but the trend of GDP values, which would have played out during 2008-9. The global financial crisis hit us, growth fell, but after the crisis, we grew very fast. So we were actually able to catch up with the GDP at that time. This time, I think that's not going to happen. I think we estimated that, did a simulation that even if India grows at, let's say, 1.8%, which was our earlier forecast, even then, I think there is a permanent loss of GDP, which you will not recover because your ability to grow so fast, I think, is not there because you don't have, neither have that kind of stimulus, and the hit is unpredictable and extremely deep. It's a demand and a supply shock together. And if you want to catch up, you need to grow at close to 9% or so. So I think depending on where the growth lands for this year, I think the more the run rate will be to catch up with the GDP. And so there is going to be a permanent loss of GDP, which is unlike the more severe crisis of 2008-9. Financial sector, I think, which lubricates the economy, the financial conditions are still tight. Today, RBI announced a number of measures to ease some of the financial conditions. There's some easing, but overall, you see the number of reds towards March and April rise, which in simple terms means that if the credit availability is choked, and number two, that for the private sector, for the corporate bonds, etc., the spreads are still very high. So clearly, I think the financial conditions which are easing in some of the advanced countries, it's not happening here. And I think the labor is a major problem. We can talk about it, but I think 2-3 headline points I want to make. One is that India has a huge proportion of casual labor, particularly in the construction sector, which has been hit extremely hard. And the migrant problem actually comes largely to some extent, I think it comes from there also. The other is that we have a category called regular wage earners in our data sets. Now the regular wage earners, not all of them have secure jobs. I mean, about 38% of those are without job contracts. So clearly there are layers and layers of vulnerabilities when you start looking at India's labor force. And I think the chart is self-explanatory. I think it's telling you, the reds are telling you which areas are more vulnerable. For instance, industry, the construction sector, the manufacturing sector, accommodation and food services, which we all know about. I think they are all virtually at a standstill. So I think huge vulnerability for India's large part of the labor force, which is either casual or it is self-employed. And then I think now coming to the policy side of it, I think, and then I will move over to the stimulus package. Now, RBI, I think, has the ability, and I think it's also doing whatever is possible. But I think in this situation, I think the role of fiscal policy is much more, because if companies are going out of order, or let's say they're going down under, or let's say the households don't have income, I think that problem cannot be sorted out by the monetary easing and provision of liquidity. I think that will only prevent dislocations in the economy and maybe try to soothe some of the segments where the credit is not going. The real support, I think, in this situation can only come from fiscal spending. I mean, whatever form it is. I mean, so I think that is very, 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 very critical in this. And I view the policy as, I think, having two objectives. I mean, one is to act as a bridge between the current crisis and also, I think, the recovery phase. So if the bridge is not strong, many of them will not reach the recovery phase, or will reach the recovery phase in a shape and form that they can't participate in the recovery, which means the companies going completely bankrupt or households' incomes getting deeply hit. Now, you have to have a strong bridge to take the people to the other side. And then when you reach the other side, I think, again, then you will need the support, because anyway, with this kind of a hit, they are not going to be in a healthy situation in any case. I mean, so you'll require stimulus, or you will require support during the crisis and after the crisis as well. And I think now coming to the package, I think this is a very, the objective of the package, I mean, seems to be to help the vulnerable sections of the population, maybe support some of the medium and small enterprises. But I think at the same time, it's also thrown at you the steps which could possibly raise the medium-term potential of the economy through reforms, etc. We can talk about that going ahead. And I think the design of the package is very clearly influenced by the lack of fiscal space, because actual fiscal spending is only about 10% of the total package, which includes, as I said, guarantees and many other mechanisms. The reforms are a good move, I think, but it's not an event. I mean, we all know that. And I think the impact of reforms is also unpredictable. So they have to be designed well, they have to be implemented well. Just to give you an example, I mean, when we were talking of GST as a reform, I think there was unanimity amongst people, analysts, that it's going to raise India's GDP. Can anybody say today that it did push India's GDP up? Actually, it might have created till now some problems for GDP growth, because now I think that's not to say that you shouldn't do them. All I'm trying to say is that it takes a while before reforms start paying off. I mean, so it's not going to impact the current problems of the economy, but I think it is if you're using this opportunity to do them, I think it's good, but I think you need to also ensure that they're designed well and implemented well. I think that's a precondition. Where the government needs to, where they will need to spend more, according to me, I think both the scale and the size of the fiscal commitment from the budget has to be increased to help both the households as well as the businesses. And in both the phases, the survival phase and the recovery phase. I also feel that you need to provide direct cash support, because I think the loans, etc., take time to materialize. I think if people have lost their revenue sources, income sources, they might need some direct support, which is being provided to some elements, but maybe not so much to the micro and nano enterprises, which are, I think, which are also facing which are a large part of the overall economy. And I think over 100 million people are employed there, and they don't have access to formal finance. So I think how do you provide support to them is important. Extension of moratorium was desired, and I think RBI has already done that today. I think the other thing where we need to focus is the safety issues of migrant. I mean, migrant labor are more than 10 crore, I mean, in India, and you need to think this crisis is telling you that you need to plan better for contingencies going ahead. I think some sort of reforms, or whatever you might call it, I think needs to be done in that area as well. And finally, I think whenever we reach the recovery phase, we need to support that. And let me close by, talking about the risks. Clearly, the path of the COVID itself is the biggest risk going ahead. And I think, I believe that if fiscal support doesn't come, then I think pains will be, it will be a very painful process, so to say. This crisis, interestingly, I think agriculture is expected to do well, and I hope the monsoons, as predicted by the IMD, also turn out well. And finally, I think another source of worry is the stress in the financial sector. Earlier, it was public sector banks, then it was the NBFCs, and then it was some of the smaller private sector banks. It was not, financial sector was not in good health, and hit to the incomes or creates further problems for the financial sector. So I think ensuring that it remains an accident-free ride on thin ice, I think that will be very, very critical to ensure, I mean, going ahead. So let me stop there, Mr. Srinivasan, and I think I can take some questions from you, from others, as you feel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joshi. So basically, to sum it up very, very briefly, the crisis is unprecedented and unpredictable because it is both a supply side shock and a demand side shock. 2, it is global in nature. 3, it has impacted all aspects of our economy. So therefore, how we sort of deal with the immediate crisis and how we deal with the outcome of it going forward is going to determine how much below the trend line, our growth trend line, if we took about 6 to 7% as the trend GDP growth rate for India pre-COVID, then how many percentage below that will be the new trend line? And how long will it take for us to get to that trend line? Which means that we are looking at, in fact, your forecast is one of the more optimistic ones for GDP growth rate for the ongoing fiscal year. Many have predicted zero, some have predicted even negative growth. You have actually gone over 1%, which is fairly optimistic. But the question is, one, how long will it take for us to get back to at least the new normal, which is going to be itself a substantially reduced GDP growth rate trend? And just for a quick, add on to that is that, I think questions of whether it's going to be a U-shaped recovery or a V-shaped recovery are really, infructious right now. It's the question is, will there be a recovery and how long will we take to get there?
Yes, I think Mr. Srinivasan, you're right. I think our forecast, which you mentioned, I think is between 0 to 1.8%. I think that's the range we gave, was done about a month back. And I think from then to now, I think a lot has happened, and we are in the process of revising our number down. We're waiting for some hard numbers because I think the hard numbers are not available. And now they've started pouring in, and they're telling you the extent of damage. So I think our numbers will probably by next week you'll see a new set of numbers which will be more aligned to what's going on right now and what's likely to happen going ahead. Now I think the shape of the recovery, I think the alphabets are typically used. I think some are talking of W, some are talking of U, some are talking of L. I think it's not for us to decide. I mean, what shape will be. It's for the virus to decide. I mean, if it decides to have a comeback again as a second wave, then I think everything that you're forecasting now, or anybody who's forecasting, is completely off the table. Then it will create some sort of a W kind of a phenomena, which Europe had witnessed after the global financial crisis, when they prematurely withdrew the monetary policy stimulus. So here, I think it will first and foremost will be decided by the path of the virus. Second, I think it will also be decided by what kind of policies do you come out with. I mean, are you able to preserve productive capacity in the economy to the extent that you can grow faster later on? I think that is very, very critical. I mean, so and I think on both the fronts, I think we are not 100% sure. We've only seen part of the virus play out, and we have seen only part of the stimulus being announced. My sense is, I think we'll see topping up of this going ahead. I think it will become inevitable you will have to provide more support. I think, and I'm not in a position to predict what shape it will take. I mean, what I do believe is that after the crisis is over, most of the crisis that India faced, whether it was 2008-9 or even 91 balance of payment crisis, the recovery has been V-shaped, and we managed to somehow, I think, get back to a trend rate of growth. This time around, I think what we will see is that we will get back to the long-term trend rate of growth. That is our base case assumption. But you will require much faster growth to catch up with the trend level of GDP, because I think you've already lost some GDP this year. You have to recover that also going ahead. That recovery is unlikely, I think. So you will see growth pick up, but you will still end up losing some part of the GDP for good. I mean, at least until 2024-25, for which we have done some simulations.
Thank you. Let me ask you about the stimulus itself. Now, I mean, the headline number is 20 lakh crore, but widely the widespread consensus is that the actual spending and the fiscal part of it would be roughly about 8 to 10% of that number. First, so there are 2 or 3 questions which arise from this. First is that, do you think that the level of stimulus is adequate to even tackle the sort of crisis already induced by the virus and the lockdown? The second is that bulk of the stimulus measures are basically focused on the supply side, whereas I think the real challenge lies on the demand side, on the reviving demand and consumption. Also, keeping in mind that, the virus is a global pandemic and it has induced a global recession. So therefore, our principal partner countries in trade and destination countries for our exports are also undergoing economic contraction. And given the global nature of this crisis, the India will be forced to rely a lot more on domestic consumption to sort of spur growth, domestic consumption and domestic investment going forward. But do you think that this stimulus has actually addressed that challenge adequately?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I think you have to also, I think, before you stimulate, I think I would use I would hesitate on using stimulating, because no amount of money you pump in can stimulate the economy at this juncture. I mean, immediately you cannot. You have to preserve people's income, to some extent, so that they're able to meet their basic needs. You have to ensure that businesses, the liquidity problem that businesses are facing, it doesn't become an insolvency problem and they completely disappear from the scene. I think that should be the objective, I think, of the stimulus right now. And I think, as I said, you need more than what has been committed. The way I think the numbers are showing for the month of April, that I think things are sliding down, and we'll be in almost 68 days of lockdown, and the first part of the lockdown was probably the most stringent lockdown in the world. So it will have repercussions which will spill over the next, even if you start opening up. And by the way, the virus curve hasn't flattened as yet. I mean, so you are still in a zone where I think you face only downside risk. So my sense is, I think the scaling up will be required, and I think it's true. I think India doesn't have the kind of fiscal space that rich countries have. I mean, they can spend their way out of the hardship, and we are not able to do that. We need to use our resources judiciously. But I think I would think that you will need more support than what is fiscally committed. And also, I think the monetary policy I believe will continue to play its role. But I think the heavy lifting has to be done through the fiscal policy. And my sense is that government will have to scale it up going ahead to ensure the survival. And also I think the stimulating supply is choked right now. I mean, so if you stimulate demand too much, I mean, let's say you give a massive stimulus package, I think it's going to lead to inflation, because you're not going to open up the supply. You cannot, I mean, because you also want to control the disease. So a massive stimulus for demand at this juncture may not be such a good idea. We gave it in 2008-9, and we saw what happened. I mean, high inflation and high deficit actually kept plaguing us for a long period of time. So I think you have to give more than what has been given, but I think you can't go overboard immediately. I mean, because it's a supply and demand issue both. The global financial crisis was essentially a demand shock. I mean, didn't translate into a supply shock. Here, I think the countries are, as you rightly pointed out, are getting hit domestically because of the dynamics of the virus, and also from the global side. I think so. It's crimping you down, and the only policy tool you have is to support the domestic side. I mean, you cannot do anything. I mean, the external environment is given. You have to operate in that. But I think domestic environment is which you can control to some extent through the policy. And I think you need more of that right now.
Let me ask you a little bit about the fiscal space, because we have discussed it, and clearly there is a challenge out there. But there are two parts to this challenge. One is, of course, the overall fiscal headroom which is available with the center. More importantly, it's the states which are at the forefront of the fight against the virus, the states which are having to cope with the immediate fallout of the economic impact, whether it is returning migrant labor, whether it is job losses, whether it is loss of revenue, because their principal sources of revenue have been stopped. There has also been a sharp fall in GST collections. So therefore, they are the ones who are also forced to create the infrastructure required to deal with the health challenges posed by the virus, so whether it's creating hospitals, quarantine facilities, so on and so forth. And they simply do not have the financial wherewithal to spend what is required on this front they have been allowed, of course, now to increase their borrowing to say, the deficit to 5%. But there is a numerator-denominator problem there as well, 5%, but the GDP is also shrinking. So the absolute amount will not be very, very large if they had to borrow more. So,
I think you're right, absolutely. I think if I were to look at what money is being provided, I would look at it vis-a-vis what was in the budget, not bother about as a percentage of GDP, because that is my reference point. I mean, what were you doing before the crisis? What would you have done, and what more are you giving beyond that? So that is one way to look at it more. Now, I think coming to the role of states, I think both center and states have to coordinate. And I must also point out that not all states are impacted differently. I mean, there's a huge variation. I mean, depending on your economic structure, the virus is very, very active in most industrial states. I mean, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra is at the top of the heap, and then Gujarat. These are states with very high share of services and industry. And I think they are getting impacted much more, and they will, and the fiscal capacity in some sense also varies across the states. Richer states can still raise more revenue, I think. What I think when I look at the fiscal space, I think I would say that states like Maharashtra, for instance, have debt to GDP below 20%, and whereas some Kerala might have debt to GDP above 30%. It has above 30%. So in that sense, it's more indebted to begin with. I mean, so different states have different fiscal capacity. Maybe I think the ability to support the economy through more borrowings, etc., may reside with some states more and may reside less with the other states. So that I think, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But I do agree that I think one of the major sources of revenue, which is, I call it an inelastic source of revenue, because the other sources that the revenue that you get from industrial activity, etc., I think they will get reduced. But liquor was one inelastic source. I mean, it would have given you, I think, even in US, I think, despite the economy sinking, I think the alcohol business is still doing well. And I think, so we should have somehow preserved this, and I think, and ensured that a huge amount of revenue that comes from it at least is preserved. I mean, that would have, and I think attempts are being made to do that. Apart from that, I think the states have very little option than to borrow more. I mean, and central government, I think the GST situation will become clear after June. I mean, once I think we know what is getting collected. And it doesn't look like a very healthy picture right now. So there will be a massive revenue crunch. And the result of this, I think what states or any fiscal authority or government typically does is the axe falls on capital expenditure. Because that, I think you just stop doing the investment activity and you focus everything on the revenue side. So I think one fallout of this is going to be a hit to the massive hit to the investment activity, which largely comes from the state governments. I mean, if I take the public investment, which is particularly in infrastructure, this government plays a very large role. I think that could get hit. I mean, as a result of all this, because they will try to balance their expenditure for revenue needs, which are very, very critical here and now. Then investment, which pays off, I think, after a long time. So I think there are repercussions. I mean, for growth potential as well. I mean, if you curb your investment, then you reduce your potential to grow ahead, going ahead. So it's a very complicated scenario that is playing out right now.
So, let's also take a look at the measures which have been taken so far. Now, primarily the center has actually used, monetary policy tools available with the Reserve Bank to, push a bulk of the measures. And there are challenges, on that front, because the banks have been risk averse going into the crisis, and the threat of widespread insolvencies or business failures is only going to make them more risk averse rather than the RBI, for instance, has sort of cut the repo rate. But is that effective in a scenario when where banks are parking an average of 8 lakh crore plus with the Reserve Bank of India, unwilling to lend? So what do we do about it?
I think there is risk aversion, and I think banks will be reluctant to part with their money, and they would be willing to give money to those who don't require it. I mean, in a sense that highly rated entities, etc. So that's a normal behavior to be expected. So I think to tackle that, I think that's where the fiscal policy comes in. I'm not saying distributing money right now. I'm saying guarantees, which I think for SMEs, which the government had introduced. Now, what the guarantee does is, I think it brings the risk appetite back into to the lender. So the rate cut from the RBI will flow as credit to these small and medium enterprises. If somebody is guaranteeing a hit, if it is not paid back, somebody has to take a hit, because banks, as you know, their position is not so healthy. They will be extremely risk averse. So I think guarantees is only one mechanism, and many countries have resorted to this route. Look at Germany, for instance, where fiscal stimulus is more than 20% of GDP. Large part of it is through guarantees. I mean, so they have given business disruption loans, and I think they're 80, 90, 70% guaranteed by the government. And I think so so you have to have monetary and fiscal policies work together. So fiscal role is extremely critical here. That's the point I was trying to make earlier also. So I think that's the way the credit will flow. And then RBI on its own has also tried to do things like LTRO to ensure there is dislocation in the bond market. Nobody wants to subscribe to those bonds. So you give a dedicated line from, banks raise money at a low rate from RBI, and then they use it for supporting the bond markets. I think all those things, it's a huge toolkit. I think RBI had used the term avant-garde policy. I mean, so they'll have to keep devising new and new tools and methods to support it. I mean, many rich countries, for instance, I think the US Treasury, US Fed, etc., they're directly buying the corporate bonds, which doesn't happen in India. But I think that what I'm trying to say is they've gone to that extreme. I mean, so we are also, I think we could also witness some of those new policies from the RBI come up, which will try to support the economy, which otherwise it will not, the monetary policy will not be able to lubricate the economy. I mean, it requires fiscal support of some sort to make that happen.
Yeah, let's look at the other visible and deep impact of the lockdown, which is job loss. Yeah. The massive migrant exodus which is still going on is the first and visible evidence that there has been widespread job loss across the economy. But the job losses are not only restricted to the unorganized informal sector labor force. It's also started biting deep in the organized sector, even in the relatively highly paid technology sector and so on. There have been job cuts, there have been pay cuts, there have been layoffs, unpaid furloughs, and so on. So it's an ongoing rolling impact. Jobs, I think, are one of the biggest challenges. Job protection or job creation going forward is going to be one of the biggest challenges which will face the economy. And also there is this huge change in consumption, which is likely to be induced by this, as incomes shrink or incomes disappear, there is obviously going to be an impact on consumption patterns. So how do you see this sort of post-COVID new normal shape up, on the jobs front? And second is that, are we doing enough to support support at least this severe erosion of income across the spectrum of the workforce? Or do you think that we can do more?
Well, I think obviously every country can do more. I mean, the issue is how much they want to stretch, and because there's no free lunch. I mean, if you are trying to support, you will have to pay the bills at some point in time. So you have to operate in that, whatever you define as your limit. I mean, as far as what you mentioned right now is that the post-COVID new normal, I think hard to predict, but I think I will still try. But before we reach that, I think the job issue that you mentioned, and now I think two two types of supports are extremely critical to me at this juncture. One is the migrants are going back to the hinterland. They will require jobs, and the only way to actively engage them is through steps like NREGA, where I think you have given a hike of 40,000 crore. I think that will definitely need topping up. I mean, given the migrant population in India. So that is one. And I think what we have even otherwise seen is that the NREGA, I think the demand is more than I think what you can provide. So you will, I think in this today the demand is going to be much more. I mean, typically a person can take job for 100 days. I think only on the average they are able to take it for only 45 days. But this time I think you'll require more support from the NREGA side. So I think that bill you will have to increase. The second, I think, thing is the construction sector, which is, I think, which is half the size of manufacturing, but employs almost same number of people as manufacturing, implying thereby that it has a very high labor intensity. I think preserve this sector. If you can support, the construction sector, then part of the migrant exodus will also stop, because many of them are engaged in construction activity. So I think, to me, I think these two elements can be job supportive right now. You can do a number of things, but I think if you focus on these two elements, I think you can, you can provide a lot of support. Apart from that, I think the ability to provide payroll support, etc. I think you'll have to stretch your public finances beyond what you have done right now. If you want to have a program like the US, for instance, PPP, the payroll protection plan, etc. I think those are also, they have their own, sometimes have moral hazard issues, but those are the ways to deal with the situation right now. But I think to me, what I said, I think construction and NREGA, I think these two things we need much greater focus, particularly if you want to address issues of vulnerable sections right now.
I completely agree with you, Dr. Joshi. But NREGA is a rural scheme, and estimates of urbanization vary. I mean, the census figures around 33% of the population, but most current estimates put it closer to 45% of the population is now in urbanized localities. So don't you think that we need a sort of urban poverty alleviation scheme on the lines of NREGA, which specifically tackles the issue and challenge of urban poverty?
No, absolutely. I think the scope for NREGA type of activity may not be that much in the urban areas. I mean, the dynamics are somewhat different. But I think among the urban poor would also be a large part of the small and what are referred to as the small and nano enterprises. I mean, very the smallest among the MSMEs. I mean, for instance, I think they do variety of activities, and I think they'll need some cash support. I think if a NREGA-like scheme can be designed for urban areas, it might be a good thing, because the good part of this NREGA is that it also, you can create productive assets, I mean, out of it. It's not just a dole. So I think something similar for urban areas will also be useful, but my sense is that they will also need immediate cash support right now, given that the hit has been very large. The loans that are being given to them will come in handy, but I think before you reach that, I think you need to, the issue is, can you reach out to all of them? I mean, are they in a radar so that we can very quickly make a support package for them?
Yes, I think that's a real challenge. But, little bit more on the job challenge, and let's look at a couple of really big employment generating sectors, which basically have been saying that, look, we've been completely left out of the stimulus package, which is the retail sector and the hospitality, travel, and tourism sector. Very large employment. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, so the retail sector, which really, if you include the small and unorganized retail as well as organized retail, is probably the largest employer after agriculture in our country. And then we have the hospitality, travel, and tourism sector, which have been devastated by the lockdown and the travel bans and the, various other norms which have been introduced directly as a result of the lockdown measures. But going forward, even when the lockdowns are eased, with the new normal of social distancing and so on, is likely to ensure that many of these businesses never return to anything like what they were in, the scale and volume of business that they had before. And also these are highly urban centric. So how do we tackle this challenge?
Yeah, I think, hello. That is a major challenge, I would say, because so far, I think we've focused from the policy side on the vulnerable part of the economy. But I think the new normal that is emerging, as you rightly pointed out, I think may be somewhat different. I mean, you may have less travel. I mean, so the travel and tourism industry could have to face problems for some more time. I mean, you'll be eating out less, eating at home more. So the hospitality sector will also bear the brunt of that. And I think there are some positive. I think it's not all negative. I mean, the other day somebody was telling me that even with what the economist had referred to as the job which can never be taken over by technology, I think is being taken over by technology. That is things like physiotherapy, etc. People are doing it through telemedicine, and not only, I think, and some of the Indian physiotherapists have been extremely busy because they're not only catering to here, but also abroad. I mean, so there are new opportunities also at the same time coming up. I mean, mask making, etc., which where the small sector can play a role. So these are dwarfed by the magnitude of the problem. I mean, it's not to say that that these are going to completely offset that. The lack of employment opportunity elsewhere. But big industry also needs support, because I think these small industries don't operate in isolation. They have B2B linkages with big industries. So I think just because the big industry is suffering, that will spill over to the smaller guy also. Some smaller folks will suffer on their own because if they don't have B2B linkages. Already, I think what CRISIL studies have pointed out is that the B2B linkages, I think, are the companies which have higher sources, larger proportion of income coming from B2B linkages have more stretch in the working capital cycle. We've also found that, I mean, through the export linkages, I mean, if you see what is happening to trade, the exports have fallen by 60%, but for labor intensive, small, medium sector intensive segments like gems and jewelry, or let's say, for instance, leather, I think the fall is almost close to 100%. So now I think, so part of it is exogenous, part of it is through the domestic economy. So you will at some point in time provide some sort of support to the middle link, to the bigger industries, so to say. Not a dole out, but I think some way of figuring out a business disruption loan, which will preserve the payrolls. And also, I think while we say all this, I think there are a lot of receivables to these businesses from government and public sector. I think they need to be also released. I mean, because if you have receivables which for the work that you've done in the past, I think right now you have a cash crunch. So I think the objective of the policymaker should also be to, I think it's being talked about, to release whatever I think payments are due to these businesses as soon as possible, because that will also be a key support at this juncture.
In fact, since you mentioned linkages, now linkages, of course, there are B2B linkages, B2C linkages, and also external linkages, and the government and Prime Minister Modi has sort of unveiled a medium to long-term vision for the country in his last address to the nation, which was Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India. How does that sort of tie in? Can it be seen as part of the sort of rising tide against globalization in the world? Or is it something which, where India can actually forge a hybrid path? Because there have been some clarifications saying Atmanirbhar is not about, being against globalization, but sort of, focusing on higher value addition internally. while remaining part of the global this thing. Is that an achievable target? Is that a possible vision?
Well, yeah, I think what it simply means is, I think in simple terms would mean is that you are open to business and you are not going to impose tariffs on imports, but which is not an import substitution policy that you will follow. But what you will do is you will get those people to operate, the businesses to come to India, operate, sell to the domestic market and also export. So that I think that has been the objective of Make in India for a long time, not achieved till now. Only in some areas there has been success, for instance, in mobile phones, etc. But the labor intensive parts of the activity from China have gone to Vietnam and Bangladesh. That's pretty well known. I mean, I need not elaborate that. So now, so you will have to, if you want to make a success out of that, I think you'll have to transform the domestic environment quite dramatically. I mean, both in terms of ease of doing business, and also, I think in terms of stability in regulation, I think you require, we have to be at least as competitive as our peers. We have a huge demand element, which is a magnet for many people to come in here, but that itself is not sufficient. That's a necessary, that may be a condition which is necessary, but I think it's not a sufficient condition to get all the capital into the economy, investments. I think that has been clearly displayed over the last few years. So I think so that form, I mean, so this crisis does provide an opportunity in some sense, because every crisis has, I think the 91 people always refer to the 91 crisis as one crisis which led to a fundamental shift, opening up of the Indian economy, and we reap the benefits of that. The consumers, everybody reap benefits of that. Now, this time around, I think you have to do a little tougher than those kind of reforms, because it's not about tariff changes or delicensing, etc. I think it's much more than the tougher parts. I think where you have the labor reform issues, you have the land availability issues, and I think on top of that, you also have, we all know India ranks almost 160 in contract enforcement. Now, with that kind of, I mean, you will not be able to become a manufacturing giant and Atmanirbhar in that sense, that you are able to massively attract foreign investment to the benefit of the nation, and I think to the benefit of everyone, actually, so to put it this way. So I think it's the hits and misses on this, I think, will only evolve over a period of time. I can't today say whether it's going to be successful or not, but it requires some preconditions. If we achieve those preconditions, obviously, I think India being the world's third largest economy in terms of purchasing power has a lot of attraction to it. I mean, and I think if the environment improves, then I think we can hope this version of Atmanirbhar Bharat can also flourish.
Yes, in fact, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about one of the paradoxes in the way that we have approached this task of attracting increased investment into this country. Now, for a long time, it was felt, and I think, when the NDA government took over, it identified India's poor ranking in the ease of doing business index as one of the principal challenges which was deterring businesses from investing in India. So it focused on that, and we have had a substantial improvement in our rankings over the last few years, but that has not really led to a corresponding surge in investments. Then we started the Make in India project, but that has also been a mixed bag. Like you said, a couple of sectors there are some success stories, but most of the cases it has not been so. Another factor which has influenced a lot of our policy making, monetary and fiscal policies, is our global rating, right? And there is a great deal of concern with our policymakers about how the measures that are being taken right now, for instance, to deal with the pandemic fallout, will impact our ratings by international agencies going forward. I would like to ask you two things. One, how real is the risk of ratings downgrade by global agencies for India going forward? And the second is, how critical is a good rating to actually, getting sustained inflows, portfolio as well as FDI inflows into this country? because we lived in the junk status ratings for decades, and investments continue to come in our markets. Portfolio investments in markets grew, FDI grew in in multiple sectors. So, how important is the ratings in the overall scheme of things?
Well, I think this is a great question, but unfortunately, I think I'm a part of S&P Group, and I think it's not in my purview to talk about this. So I unfortunately cannot answer your question related to sovereign ratings. But I think they do have a role to play. I mean, it's not that, I mean, the foreign investors do look at the country ratings before putting money in. So they have a role to play. But I think beyond that, I think I cannot speak on this issue.
So, we are coming close to the, end of our allotted time, but I'm going to ask you a very television style question now. Which is this, that if you were the finance minister, what would be the 5 steps that you would take which haven't been taken so far?
Well, I think that's a tough one. So one step I think I would definitely take is, I think, to provide cash support to the small and the nano part of the small and medium enterprises. I think they need to be supported. Then I think I would also, I think, work on designing some sort of a framework, policy framework for addressing the issues of migrants on a long-term basis. I think I would start it on a war footing, because that will also give comfort to them. I would also start, I think, looking at what will I do during the recovery phase. Also start planning, though it's too early. I think maybe start articulating what we will do. I think what we intend to do once this problem is over. I think these are, I think, few things I can. The list could be, I mean, it could be long. I think, but I would say that these 3 things, which I mean, at least I would focus on right now.
We've had, in our Q&A window, we've had more than 100 questions so far posed by our audience. So there are more than 500 people on, been watching us. So we've been trying to sort of filter out the questions. There have been, of course, a lot of, repeat questions and so on. But I have tried to cover most of the aspects of the questions which have been asked. But one consistent question which comes up again and again is that, if there is a solution found to the virus threat itself, that is a vaccine, a viable vaccine, and there are estimates of a vaccine being available from as early as September to, early next year, will that sort of change the future path that you've outlined significantly?
Well, I think what will happen is, I think, is hard to predict, but I think some of the things have changed for good. As Satya Nadella had said other day, that 2 years of digital transformation has taken place in 2 months. So I think some of those elements of work from home, I think we will have less travel, business travel. I think people will figure out ways of saving costs and doing it effectively. And this is the biggest business contingency shock that I think that the system could see. So I think it is from the digitalization perspective, I think those who can operate in this environment, I think for them it is a fundamental and a long-term shift. It's not going to change. The other, I think, thing which my sense is that we will, the focus on the healthcare will be of a different nature. I mean, this is, pandemics have been happening, not pandemics, but the epidemics have been happening at a fast frequency now. And they can turn into pandemics also. So this is a big wake-up call. And in such a situation, I think it's very different from somebody getting a heart attack. I mean, you don't spread the heart attack to others. So this is a very different, and this is a medical problem where state has to step in. So my sense is that the governments will have to play a very active role in the healthcare, I think, going ahead. So that is going to change, I think, going ahead. And I think apart from that, it will also provide an opportunity for at least particularly small businesses to look at low cost ways of dealing with medical issues. I mean, we've already seen some people companies trying to manufacture cheaper ventilators, etc. All these things, I think, will and for a country like India, it requires cheaper medical care. So some of these things will be more fundamental in nature. They will last beyond the crisis. I mean, it's going to be somewhat different world that we will live in going ahead.
I think that's a very good cue for my last question, which is that, if you could sort of quickly give us an idea of which are the sectors which do you think will be the biggest gainers from this, and which will be the ones which will be worst impacted and maybe will not be able to recover at all?
Well, that's a very difficult call, but I would say that these segments you have the FMCG, retail, etc. These will not be hit hard and they will continue. I mean, so that I think they are ones which are moderately impacted, and I think they are not going to change going ahead. But I think the things could change somewhat for airlines industry, for instance, for the hospitality sectors, as people will travel less. I think that's my sense. I mean, you will figure out ways of extracting efficiency by traveling less. You don't have to be there for a meeting. I mean, if we can do this webinar on a very effectively through this platform, then what is the need to get a big hotel to do it? And I think, and spend lakhs of rupees to get people, serve them lunch. I think if the idea is knowledge dissemination, it's being done through technology. So I think some sectors are like this. There could be a permanent and a long-term hit to them. But the major beneficiary will be the digital sectors, which can digitalize their activity. And as I said, I think the canvas is quite broad there, and there could be some other forms of digitalization which could happen, which we don't know right now. I mean, and for instance, I told about the telehealth. I think telehealth sector will see a major, I think, major change, I mean, so to say. And I think the healthcare system will undergo quite a bit of transformation. I think this is not a small shock which you will forget. I mean, this is not a risk that will go away after the shock is taken care of. People are talking about this being something like from WHO being something like polio, I mean, which might take a long time to eradicate. So we really have to watch out for what kind of things play out. But I do see my rest of life changing quite dramatically, I think, going ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joshi. We have reached the end of our time. Thank you very much for sharing your insights and observations with us. It's been very, very enlightening. And I think, if I were to sum up my sense of our discussion so far, actually, I've been left feeling a little less pessimistic than when I started. So it is a very, very grave crisis. There are very great challenges, but I think it's also a time of opportunity. And given the size of our country, given the innovativeness of our population, I'm sure that, we will be able to come out of it on the other side in probably better shape. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much for providing me this opportunity. It's been a great pleasure.